This is the Do Better podcast with Dr. Megan Miller and Joe Smith.
Welcome to the Do Better podcast. In today's episode, we are interviewing Laney, BCBA, and Michael Brande about RIE Parenting. This is where we blast off to the final frontier in search of improving ourselves in the field of behavior analysis. Thank you for spending time with us. Now let us begin.
Hey everyone, how are you doing on this lovely Saturday?
Super great. So happy to be here.
Well.
Good.
Thank you for having me.
So I'm doing well too. How are you doing, Megan?
I am good. A little sad because football season's over. I mean, the Super Bowl is tomorrow, but other than that, but
if we are recording this podcast the day before the Super Bowl, so let's go ahead. Megan, what's your prediction? Who's
that
gonna win?
There will be a lot of COVID cases. It's in Tampa and they've been showing footage of all the people that are in town and it's just ridiculous. But I mean, it's outside, everyone's outside. So maybe it won't, who knows? We'll find out. But obviously Tampa is going to win.
No. I know Brady's the GOAT, but I mean, come on. I'm rooting for Kansas City. Brady had his Super Bowls. You just can't go from one team to the next team and win a Super Bowl.
Actually you can, and they're proving that right now, but, and Tampa hasn't won a Super Bowl in so long. You jumped on the Browns bandwagon, jump on the Tampa one.
I will never jump on a Tom Brady bandwagon.
You should totally jump on Tom Brady. I'm serious about that.
No.
Although I was disappointed to find out in our We'll Decide Wednesday last week that apparently Tom Brady is a Trump supporter.
He's a big one. Yeah.
So that just ruined it for me, but I still want Tampa to win.
All right. So that's good.
Well, Michael, you didn't weigh in. We have 2 for Kansas City, 1 for Tampa. What do you got?
Listen, I until I found out this breaking news that Tom Brady was a Trump supporter, I was going to say, I'd prefer Tampa to win. But now, I mean, I think ultimately what's going to happen is Kansas City is going to wipe the floor with them. I think they're a better team. I think that you can't score with them. I don't think Tampa Bay can score with them. So, but I do like the story. Tampa Bay, first time that a team has ever played in the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So the backstory, I like that. So I'm a sucker for the dramatic. So hey, you know what? If Tampa can pull it off, and it's a Florida team, that helps. But I don't like that. I don't like that Brady Trump thing, and I don't like Brady. I'm a Dolphin fan, So I can't.
No Dolphins.
Thank you. So I'm torn. But if I was betting, if I had money on it, Kansas City's gonna wipe the floor with them. That's what I think is gonna happen.
Well, fine. I'll just be in my little lonely Tampa corner over here. But also college basketball, Ohio State's doing really awesome right now. So I don't usually watch until the March Madness, but I'm super excited about their performance right now.
My household is a die hard, not by choice, Tar Heels family. So I'm not allowed to say anything but go Tar Heels or
I was gonna guess since you're in Washington, Gonzaga, but
I'm UW because that's my alma mater, but my husband bleeds Carolina blue, so it's a Tar Heel house.
That's the one sport that my wife and I don't have any interest in is basketball. So we can get along very well with basketball, but when it comes to hockey and football, it's Penn State, it's Steelers, and it's Pittsburgh Penguins.
Hey, watch out for the Washington team coming up in the NHL.
You know what? We did win against the Caps, so we're fine.
But we also know that Tampa, just real quick, going back to the Super Bowl, Tampa Bay Lightning won this, Stanley Cup, and the Rays made it to the World Series, but they didn't win. So wouldn't it be fun if Tampa could win the Super Bowl and just finish out that little
also
2020.
part of that dramatic backstory. That's the part that I'm like, you know what? It's kind of cool. That's kind of cool.
And this is a city that reminds me so much of Cleveland because like they're used to losing all the time. So like if Tampa can do it, Cleveland can at some point.
But that also reminds me of like, you know, Boston Red Sox won. Then you had the New England Patriots winning.
Right.
And I even think the Boston Celtics won that year too, or 1 year, or they just went to the finals, but then
went to the finals. Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's get into our topic for today.
Okay.
People are like, when did the Do Better podcast turn into a sports podcast? What is happening right now?
Coming at you. ESPN.
All right, Joe, you're up with our first question.
Yeah. So I would love for Hillary to introduce herself and tell us a little bit about your background with RIE as well.
Sure. I'm Hillary Laney. I live in Washington State and I'm a BCBA. I have always, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. And when I started, I've always really had a passion for early childhood, pregnancy, birth, breastfeeding, and like infancy education. And so when I started like learning about that, I really fell into the attachment parenting world. But when I had my children, attachment parenting did not prepare me for tantrums and feelings and the postpartum depression and the things that would come up as a mother for me that are so hard to manage when attachment parenting tells you to just always be there for your child. So I'm a research guru type of person. So I just started like looking around, and I had kind of come across RIE, and I will fully disclose, I don't love their sleep or early infancy stuff, but I love their management of behavior. I think I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but it really aligned with my belief systems around how I practice in applied behavior analysis. I did a lot more research and I started applying it and using it with my kids. And I will never, ever say that I'm perfect at it or an expert at it, but I will say that it has transformed not only my parenting, but also my practice as a behavior analyst in terms of how I relate to children and how I work with kids, especially when they're struggling with their emotions, and how to set them up for a successful environment.
That's so awesome.
Nice. That is. All right. Michael, you're up. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background with RIE?
Yeah, so basically, I'm a dad. I'm a father of a 3-year-old. Before that, I was a stepfather to 3 children as well, who are a lot older. They're currently 21, 17, and about to be 14. So, I kind of was thrust into the parenting world, if you will, simply by association. I became a stepdad, kind of out of nowhere. And so I had to learn on the fly how to be a father. And then, having learned that, then I had my own child, and I had to figure out, how to apply the things that I had learned sort of on the fly, but then to somebody who I'm raising sort of from infancy, right? So it was a different game. I came upon RIE because, it was the only thing that when I read about it and I was trying to do research and I was trying to just be a good dad, it was the one thing that led me to the understanding that I could actually speak to my child and just relate to my child, where I saw a lot of parents it seemed as if that was a difficulty for them, right? Like the way that they treated the infant or the way that they treated the child seemed so different than the way that they would treat everybody else in their life. And I saw that disconnect, and I just didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be that kind of parent. I wanted to be the kind of parent that allowed for my child to have opportunities to just be themselves. There was an independence I thought that was lost when I would kind of look at other parents and the way that they were parenting. So RIE sort of allowed the ability to sort of see that person as an individual and treat that person as an individual and give me the tools to understand how to do that with patience and not getting overly frustrated and overly emotional. And I tend to be somebody who tends to be emotional. So it was molding me at the same time that I was learning how to be a parent. So that's kind of where I come from the RIE background. And I agree with everything that Hillary said. There are certain aspects of RIE that I really don't necessarily subscribe to. particularly when they're infants and sort of letting them play on their back and sleeping on their back. And there's a couple of, it's interesting because RIE tries to not be so strict. It kind of pretends to be not strict, but there are certain aspects of it that it is, and when that happens, that's where I think Hillary and I agree. We kind of step away from that particular thing. But so yeah, that's where I come from. Basically, I'm just a dad. I'm a dad trying to do the best I can. That's me.
I love it. I love what you just said. And I want to add, this is also what drew me to RIE, is seeing the child and the infant as a human first and everything else second. And I think this is something I wrote down I wanted to talk about, but I'm just going to say it right now that this really resonated with me working with population of people with disabilities, that people do this to our population too. They don't see them as humans first. And when I started, I've always been involved with children, and I had the same realizations that you do, Michael. Like, people don't see children as humans deserving of dignity and respect first. And RIE really resonated with me with my kids, because I didn't see a lot of parents and educators and other people in my field doing that. And RIE gives you the tools to do that. So I really love that you said that.
Yeah, agreed.
I love that summary, Hillary. Joe, I didn't have this down, but I'm curious, for the fostering training that you're doing and those types of things, have you and your wife been researching different parenting advice or like theories or anything like that?
We have dabbled a little bit, like here and there, but it's like, I feel like we ebb and flow off each other very well. Like, we talk about it when things come up, and we are able to problem solve together. I think after this episode, I'll probably look more into RIE, just because I'm more interested in it. There are a couple questions I have, just like based off like some other information I just glanced at about it, because I wonder about certain methods as well. But no, I feel like we just have a natural, we take care of kids. Like I work with kids all day. She has worked with two children whenever she was a caretaker for a 15, at first it was a baby and then she's been with the family for 14 years. So she kind of has that already parenting instinct already. Yeah. Raising those boys while she was working with them. But I feel like we just have this natural knack, but I'm sure there's things that I and her didn't even think of that, we might be like, oh, what about this?
Yeah.
So
it's funny you say that, because I was listening to Hillary and Michael talk about researching things, and I was like, oh shit, I never did that. Like, I've never done that, and I'm a behavior analyst, so I probably should have. When I found out that I was pregnant, I was just like, I don't know, I just assumed, because I'd been in the field for so long, that like I didn't need to really learn about anything. And I was older, so I was just like, I know these things. I know all the kids stuff, right? And nothing happened the way I thought it would, from breastfeeding to birth, like all of the things. I was like, wait a minute, this is not how any of this is supposed to be. But the only like parenting thing I ever read was Glenn Latham's book, The Power of Positive Parenting, and he's a behaviorist. But even when I was reading that, there was like parts of it that I was like, oh yeah, I should have Taylor's dad read this, because he like doesn't do these things. But I know all of this stuff. I don't need to read it. But there were parts of it that I was like, with Extinction, yeah. Hillary and Joe, like I was just like, nope, we're not doing that. And like some of the procedures, it didn't really click with me, but it never like crossed my mind that like there could be somebody out there who'd written something better that like would connect. And I always loved your post, Hillary, when we were both like sharing about our parenting struggles, but I never like realized it was probably coming from somewhere. I just thought, oh, she's just an amazing behavior analyst who's like come up with these things. And then Michael sent me the info for some of the stereo stuff we're doing. And as soon as I looked at the website, I was like, where has this been all my life? Why did I not know about this? So for those of you who are listening, if you're currently a parent, or if you're planning to have children ever, we'll have the info in the show notes. And obviously we're going to dive in more on like what RIE parenting actually is, but I highly recommend checking it out, because even if you think you know all the things, it's definitely going to have information that's different for you. All right. So our next question is, like we've mentioned it, we're talking about RIE. We're going to dig into that, but I wanted to find out first. I kind of just shared my story a little bit, but what is everyone, even Joe, like, I know you don't have kids yet, but I just wanted everyone to share, like, what did you think parenting would be like before you actually had children? And Michael, your answer might be a little bit different because of the stepfather situation, but even when you knew you were like expecting a child and like during that time of like pregnancy, what were you picturing that would be like once the baby was born?
Yeah. So for me, so my story is a little bit, so it's typical, I guess, of a lot of people, but just so full disclosure, my child was, first of all, I was not in a relationship, right, when my girlfriend, if you will, became pregnant. As a matter of fact, she was on birth control. I had taken a Plan B, okay? So the context in which I had a child, okay, was surprise, right? It was not, right, which again, is typical in a lot of situations, but that is, when you're asking the question, when I thought about having a child, right? All growing up, if you ask my parents or if you ask my grandparents, they have this thing, they thought that I'd never wanted children, right? And that actually wasn't the case. It's not that I never wanted children, it's that I literally wanted to have children in the right context, right? I wanted to make sure I was financially stable. I wanted to make sure that I had, that everything was stable essentially. And what ended up happening was quite the opposite, right? Mm-hmm. So when you ask me that question, it comes with a lot of baggage, my answer, because a lot of the things psychologically that I thought were supposed to be in place and that I was equipped to make sure they were in place weren't. So when it comes to having a child, I had to like really project out, okay, well, what's this going to look like now? Is it how is a co-parenting situation rather than a sort of marriage or whatever traditional sort of situation? Since I don't have that, how is this going to look? And so part of why I started to do research, it's funny how you were talking about, Megan, like you hadn't done the research. I mean, I think part of the reason why I was so interested in doing research was because of what I considered to be the uniqueness of how I got here, right? I was thrust into being a stepfather. We had a child surprise, if you will. So I started doing a lot of research just because I already felt like things were not in place that should have been in place. And so when I looked at having a child, what did I think? I thought, well, what I need to do is I need to make sure that, number one, I don't repeat the issues that I had with my parents in the past. That was my main thing. Just don't, for example, don't spank. There's a lot of things that were happening to me in my childhood. I wanted to make sure weren't going to happen moving forward. So a lot of it was fear-based, if I was honest. A lot of it was what not to do, and not so much what to do. I think that's really what informed my research. It's really what informed me as a parent. I really didn't think a lot about what to do. I thought a lot about what not to do. And in that research, in that fear-based, if you will, research, I started to learn what to do. And so that's how I got. I really didn't have a plan, as you can see by how I got here. It was a lot of non-planning. So then I had to counteract that with a lot of research. That's kind of where I was at.
I think that's such a wonderful example for listeners, though, because like you said, there's so many different ways people come around to become a parent. So I think sometimes when people come from the non-traditional way, there's senses of shame or guilt or, different negative things that come up when it's, that's not, they just go with the flow and like you deal with it. So I like that we have an example of, a different way and showing that, that doesn't have to create some sort of like negative outcome forever. Right. So I appreciate you sharing that. Hillary, what about for you?
So I've been working with kids and like nannying and babysitting since I was 11. And so when I went to become and I was a behavior analyst in the field for I became certified like almost the day I had my son. But
how'd you pull that off? You took the test while you were like super pregnant?
I was like 9 months pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Well, I took my BCBA so that I could work from home and do telehealth. And then when he was 6 months old, I took the BCBA, which I don't know how I did it, but I passed
how you did that
times.
Wow.
Good job.
Yeah, thanks. But I started in the field in 2009, and I honestly and all of my friends and family will tell you this, that I am a know-it-all, and I thought I was going to be so easy and I was going to be a better parent than anyone else, and I had it all down. And man, so I was gonna have a home birth, I was gonna breastfeed, that this was what was going to happen, right? Like this is the person that I am. And I had preeclampsia, I had an emergency C-section, my son had ties, and we had to have oral surgery when he was a baby, and it was really tough, and it was like literal grit and determination that we were able to breastfeed. Like nothing went the way that it was supposed to go. And so my redheaded, this is how it's going to be stubbornness was just flipped on its head, and I had to quickly 180 figure out my life, and then throw in a healthy dose of postpartum depression, and it just became a big mess, right? So like I said earlier, I thought it was going to be this beautiful, you're laying in bed breastfeeding your baby and everyone's catering to you and it's so pretty, and then you have this 2-year-old who's eating all the healthy foods because you've always presented them with vegetables since they were a baby, and they all, and you're a behavior analyst, so they have good language skills and they don't have big behaviors, and none of that happened at all, right? So really what happened is I had children, and I realized that my dreams weren't what they were going to be, and I had to figure it out and find new ways to cope with that. And like I said earlier, RIE really helped. It helped me in so many ways, more as a parent struggling with mental health and life in general than anything, to learn how to manage myself in relationship to my children. So
I love that. That's the best description, because there's so many moms listening, or future moms listening, that have that same, all of what you just described. And there's not enough realistic discussion for women, especially around what actually happens, because you see the Instagram, you see the Facebook, you see the blogs of the moms with those things, with all that perfect story happening. And you're like, yeah, so it's just easy. These things just happen. You don't see the stories about postpartum or when it doesn't work. People they're not as vocal about those things. So thank you so much for sharing that, Hillary.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's nice to hear that your idea, that's what I'm envisioning is whenever we're going to do my wife and I are going to do foster care and hope to adopt through the foster system. But I'm imagining that everything that we thought of and are preparing for, we know that's not going to be the same, but I'm still thinking that there's going to be things that come up that I never thought was going to happen. And I'm just keeping that awareness up, just because like you said, you had this picture perfect idea of what it's like to have kids, and that just completely got flipped around. So
I really thought I had all the tools. That's the thing. I mean, right. I did all the research. I knew, not only did I want to have a home birth, I also researched what would happen in a C-section and what would happen in all these scenarios. I was a behavior analyst, so I understood I feel like I really understood human behavior, but everything doesn't matter when you're not sleeping and you can't walk because you've had major surgery and you're caring for an infant who can't eat well. It just doesn't work that way. Yeah. Right. I did not have the tools I thought that I needed, and it's trial by fire type of tools too. That's the other thing. I'm sure Michael can relate. He still did a lot of research, but nothing prepares you for what tools you're actually going to need to apply, and then realize what tools you don't actually have to use.
That's right. Yeah. And it's exactly that. It's all about putting tools in your tool belt. Whether or not you use them or not is not the relevance. The relevance is how many you have.
Yes.
You just have to have a lot because you have to be prepared for it. And that's what I did. I just kept putting tools in my tool belt, right? So I kept looking and researching. And the reason why RIE worked, and I think Hillary pointed this out too, and she talked about how she was the one learning, right? That's really the point here, right? What I learned is to be fluid and to realize that I'm the one learning, not so much that I'm the one who knows anything. And I think that's the flip round that I really enjoyed mentally and psychologically with RIE Parenting, right? It was the idea of, because when we talk about respecting a child and we talk about treating a child as a human, what we're really saying is that they're just at a level and we're at another level when it comes to learning, but we're both learning equally, like at the same rates of learning, right? It's just that they're here and we're here. When we look at it that way, then we start to realize, and this is what helped me from a mental standpoint, right? From mental health standpoint even, is that it wasn't that I need to teach my daughter anything necessarily. I mean, that's going to happen naturally, but it's that she's teaching me along the way just as much. And actually that might be much more important. It's much more important for me to realize how much she's teaching me rather than me take the lead of teaching all the time to her. And that principle in RIE Parenting was so important, not just for our relationship, but for my mental health, for my growth and for my ability to be fluid. It was very important. So I really, it resonates a lot what Hillary's saying with my experience.
It takes the pressure off. I mean, I think that's what really helped my mental health is, and again, I'll reframe that early infancy. I really struggled with a lot of RIE, like leave the baby alone, don't hold them, don't nurse them to sleep. So like, I agree with Michael, like it's a toolbox, you have a toolbox. I still pulled a lot from my attachment parenting beliefs or in early infancy, but that's the idea of giving your child space to learn and space to grow independent of you, that you are not responsible for that. They are responsible for that, that your responsibility as a parent is to create that space and allow them the space to grow. That takes off a lot of responsibility of like, oh, I got to teach my kid how to regulate their emotions. Oh, I have to teach my child to talk. Oh, I have to teach my child to eat their vegetables, right? Instead, you set up I will say this over and over, it very much aligns with my ABA like practice, is that you provide an environment where learning can occur and you allow the child to teach you what they need to continue to learn. And they will tell you that. And it's your job just to do those things for them until they can figure out to do them for themselves. And that is part of the growing process. But as a parent, it really took the pressure off of me to, do this and do that and discipline and do these things and make sure that every time, like coming from an ABA background, I really had to relearn some things, like every time follow the same consequence, right? Like, no, that's not at all what you have to do, actually. In fact, every time you need to just allow the process to occur and provide a safe and loving place your child can experience the world and their own emotions and learn. That's it. It's really easy.
Yeah,
it's not,
what you just said, Hillary, you said one word that really resonated with me: discipline, right? The discipline piece is the piece that for me is the one thing, I was asked like, what did I think to be a parent? Well, I got disciplined a lot when I was a child. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I got beat, okay, like legit. So one of the main things that I didn't want to do, that I didn't want to transfer over to my parenting style, was this idea of discipline. And I've had to work through that. Even with my stepchildren originally, like I made a lot of mistakes because I was working through the discipline piece. That was really the piece that I wanted to work on, to get better at, to do better, if you will. What I found with RIE Parenting is exactly that. It allowed me, when, like what you said, Hillary, when you create a space in which education and learning can take place, what you're also doing as a consequence of that is you're eliminating the idea of discipline in a lot of ways, because you don't feel the need as a parent to have to do so much. And so the frustration and the piece of the discipline piece that happens with parents is they feel like they're not meeting their own goals, or their children are not. There's all these goal settings, and then it leads to frustration, it leads to anger, and ultimately to discipline that tends to not work. When you create the space and allow for the education to come in a fluid way, the way that you just described, Hillary, you also, as a consequence, are allowed or sort of you sort of disconnect yourself from the discipline piece in a very healthy way.
Yes.
And that to me has really helped me to grow in a very short period of time. I mean, the way that I treat my daughter in the last 3 years has been exponentially different than the way that I even was a stepfather, the 6 years prior. So, it was, the discipline piece is really important for me.
Yeah, and if you unplug the discipline piece, you can plug in the connection piece, right? And I think that resonates because, that's where learning really occurs, is when there's a safe person to connect with and work through difficulties. So I totally hear that. And you keep talking about being a stepfather to teenagers. And I just think about Janet Lansbury always talking about how she treated her teenagers the same way she treated them when they were toddlers, that their brains are very similar. And so I just think every time you talk about that, I think RIE for like people think about RIE as like a preschool intervention, but really the principles apply along the lifeline, that like you create this space, this non-judgmental, loving, caring, really well cultivated space for people to have feelings and grow. And you are there for them through that. And that works for teenagers too, but it's definitely, I think, a harder art.
Oh God, it works interpersonally with anybody. It works with the person at the bar who just wants to have a conversation with you. I mean, it works with your partner. It works. it's the idea of like you said, creating space and just allowing the process to work. That's yeah, well said.
Cultivate connection. That's really, I think, the root of RIE. Cultivate connection.
Love it. I feel like we could have just thrown the two of you in here, and like Joe and I don't even like just watch you talk about it. And this is so great to take in all of this information.
It's so wild just to hear you guys talk about it, because like I thought, like even my like growing up, like I was always taught that, you know, your parents are the ones that are trying to teach you, and the parent's job is to teach and help mold the child growing up into being this individual. And that's your job as a parent.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting, and it throws me through a loop hearing you guys talk about how your job, the parent's job, is just to create that safe place to grow and learn.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, like, about like even natural consequences, like, you know, as a toddler, like if you have just a normal space and like, let's say they climb up on top of the sofa and fell off of it. I mean, like, where's that natural consequence at? But, you know.
So I love talking about this because I oftentimes manage. So the next question is about, sorry, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Like, what is RIE? But I think that this is RIE, right? So in RIE, when you have a child who's not capable of making decisions on their own about dangerous situations, you make a space where all decisions that they make are going to be okay, right? So you create an area. So typically, like if you're thinking about toddlers, for example, like RIE would say, create an area with gates and a space that is fully safe for your child to explore without you needing to place limits upon them, because the limitations limit growth. So for me, what that meant with my boisterous 2 and 3-year-old is that we had a gate across our kitchen, and we had our tables, our chairs. We left our chairs on our dining room table because for me, it wasn't a big deal if he climbed on our table. It wasn't something that I was going to fight a battle about, but we gated off anything that I didn't want him to get into without me was gated off or closed off or whatever. And then if he climbed on something and he fell, that was an opportunity for him to learn about his own body and what he needed to do with his own body. So he falls, and I'm like, if you have a boy ever, toddler boy, I don't know many who don't like to climb and do really, really crazy things. My daughter's not like that at all, but my son would climb on the table and he'd climb down, and he needed like things to do with his body at all times. So he would fall frequently. And so if he would fall, I would just be there for him, and I would talk to him and say, you know, wow, that was really scary. I'm sorry that happened. Like, you know, your body, sometimes you need to remember to put your hands in certain places. And so I would just connect with him in that moment. And I wouldn't try to soothe it away. I wouldn't be like, you're okay, it's fine. I would let him know, like, I know that hurt and that was scary, and I'm here for you, and I can help you learn to do that better if you want, or you can try it on your own. I'm available to you how you need me to be available to you. And so that's the essence of RIE, is you create a space where all mistakes are okay, that they don't have dire consequences. And then you are there for your child if they make a mistake, or if something happens, if they get hurt, in a way that is meaningful for them to recalibrate, or as we like to say in ABA, self-regulate, but instead actually it's co-regulation, to co-regulate, get back to a place where they feel safe and secure, to then go try it again. And then they try it again, and maybe they fail again, and then you're still just there for them and say, wow, you really tried to do that so hard. Man, I hate when I fall. Like, I hate when stuff like that happens to me. Like, and then you maybe, if they are open to it, you maybe provide them some opportunities to problem solve with you if that's what they want. My 2-year-old doesn't want that. He wants to figure it out on his own. So don't you dare, mom, tell me to put my foot there because I don't want to do that. I say, you can, when you're ready, you can try again. It's available to you and I'll be here for you if something happens. There's no need to make a child feel better. And I think that resonates really well with me, and it really helped with postpartum depression. I'm going to keep talking about, so I had postpartum depression and anxiety with both of my kids, and RIE really helped me to step away from needing to manage other people's emotions when I could barely manage my own. So knowing that I didn't have to fix it and I didn't have to make them feel better, instead my sole job was to be available to them, to co-regulate with however they needed. And when they felt ready and when they would tell me what they needed, and I just had to meet that need, right? So I'm not someone, I even tell in ABA when I'm running sessions, all of my texts will tell you, never say it's okay in front of Hillary, right? Because if a child's crying, it's not okay. If they're upset, it's not okay. Instead, we should just validate with them and allow them the space to manage their own emotions.
I love that example so much, Hillary. That is so great. I had two thoughts, and then Michael, you can chime in. One thing that came up for me with the toddler piece and like the falling is like, that's the best time for them to learn about their bodies anyway, when they're so like flexible and nimble. And if they fall, they're likely not actually going to get that hurt, but they can learn more about like how to place their body parts in different ways to not get hurt. So I think, that has nothing to do with RIE, but it just came up for me. And then the other piece is just how I need to go back and listen to the recording and write it down, how many different skills. And that one example you gave of like falling off of a chair and how you co-regulated with your son, how many skills he was learning in that time. And then if you do the flip on that, if you're the parent that's like, oh, no, you can't climb, that's dangerous. Or maybe they do fall and you're right there to swoop them up and just like say it's okay and not actually work through that problem solving piece. And you just shut it down and you're like, nope, no more climbing, natural consequence. You got hurt. Can't do this anymore. There's so many skills that from a really young age, they could be learning relating to problem solving, gross motor coordination, language, that you're just completely shutting off the opportunity. Yet most parents would think they're teaching their child during that time. Like we're teaching you how to be safe. And it's like, at the expense of what though? And
before Michael goes, I just want to say really quick, one of the things that RIE talks about is don't say be careful, right? Because you're not actually teaching your child to do anything. So like a lot of instincts parents have when their kids are doing things that are quote unquote dangerous is to say, be careful, don't fall, be careful. Instead, what we should do is just observe, right? Take a step back and say, wow, you're really high. There's nothing to that, right? Just it helps the child be like, what? Oh, I am really high. Or, oh, I see there's a foothold over there. Not you should put your foot there, but like just help them be aware of the environment, because as any of us know, kids can get really hyper focused. And so sometimes it's just nice for someone to be like, hey, look, there's like some other things that might be going on. You might want to be aware of, but I'm not going to tell you to be aware of it. I am just going to make some observations about what's happening. And if you are interested in making those observations with me, you're welcome to. And if you're not, I'm open to that too. There's no need for you to follow my direction in that moment. And so really just making, I struggle with this, something I have a really hard time with, not saying, wow, that's really cool. Instead saying, oh man, you made a yellow tower, right? So instead of adding something that puts a value on what they're doing or what they've done, you put an observation, and that leaves that as an open communication rather as a closed communication. I think that is a really powerful tool from RIE.
That reminds me of like, just from a behavior analytics sense, you're just doing tons of language modeling and modeling how to kind of observe the environment again, without putting in your own like values or biases on it.
Yep. It reminds me of reciprocal imitation training, which is what I did my master's thesis in.
Yeah.
If anyone wants to do like ABA based, what this is, that is it right there. Reciprocal imitation training. And it's.
Did I know that, Hillary? Have we talked about that before?
I think we have once, maybe a while ago.
Because you know how I love reciprocal imitation training.
Yes, I do.
All right.
I'm literally writing this down.
Good. Reciprocal imitation training by Brooke Ingersoll.
Don't worry. Yeah, Michael, it'll be in one of the webinars you're watching for me, so you'll learn all about it.
I love it. Beautiful.
All right, so we'll finally. Go.
And we'll probably
talk.
put that in the show notes too, right?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
please do. I did want to add, just to put focus on something, because I agree with everything that's being said here, and I think it's really a great discussion. I do want to just, for people who are listening, who are parents, who, for example, when we talk about a safe space, right? I can already hear some parents going, well, yeah, but I live in a 1-bedroom, efficiency with my kids, and there's only so much I can do with the environment to make it quote unquote safe, right? So all of a sudden, things like these concepts seem sort of highfalutin to a lot of people who are living in certain situations. They all of a sudden, so they'll tune out from this conversation because they'll go, oh yeah, sure. If you have all the tools to be able to create a perfect space for everybody, if you're a behavior analyst who is able to, speak a certain way, like I can already hear. But here's the thing. And here's what I want people listening to understand. A safe space is not necessarily the actual environment physically, right? What we're talking about. If you notice what Hillary's talking about a lot, what we're really talking about is providing a safe space, even in communication. So if you shift your focus from the physical atmosphere and the environment to the actual communication and how you're creating a safe space for your child when you're doing things like not instructing them and not imposing upon them with your speech, right? What you're actually doing is you're creating an open atmosphere through your communication, so that even if you're the parent who cannot create the perfect space for your toddler or infant, because you don't have the tools to do so physically, what RIE Parenting will let you do and teach you how to do is when you're communicating with them when they fall from the couch, that you could not safely present for them, right? When they fall from that environment, what you're creating is a communication that is safe, that is open-ended, that is fluid, and that allows for them as children to be the fire, if you will, to that communication. You're learning from them, and you're providing that safe space. So when we talk about open and safe and all that, we're not necessarily always talking about physical. We're really literally talking about the psychological and the ability to communicate in such a way that allows for agency to take place.
Thank
Totally.
you.
And
Sorry.
Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, so I really love your and Hillary's example and how you explained that, because like when I was looking at like into it, I was envisioning like creating a space that is just physically safe. Like there's no way of them like getting hurt or anything. So that makes me feel a lot better, and that makes me feel like, oh, this is really great stuff.
And thinking back to what Michael said earlier, right? Like it's a toolbox. Have I always created a perfectly safe environment? No. I am like my theme of my entire life is parsimony. And I think that's probably why I like RIE, because I can be a little bit lazy in what I like. RIE allows you to not do a lot as a parent, which I love. It's good that it's effective too. But did we always have like a perfect space? No. And I think even on some of the RIE parenting boards, people are like, well, you should have your space like this, and here's our space, and we have this one thing in the environment. And it's like, okay, we're getting a little too strict here. Like life is still life, right? Like we're still gonna have to deal with some of the life things. We're not always going to be able to prevent having to deal with those things. And so I do think, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, I do think there are some things about RIE that are a little bit too hard, like black and white for me. And that's not to say they're not too black and white for other people, and I really like that you said that, Michael, because like my daughter's 3, and technically for RIE, we would still do some of those things, but like we don't, because that's just not what our life requires right now. And nor does she as a person either. And she has a 5-year-old brother. So like life gets a little messy sometimes. And just like any parenting philosophy, I feel like you lose some of the value if you ascribe to everything as a black and white rule. Instead, I love taking things from RIE and attachment parenting and my applied behavior analysis background and creating something that works for my family and that I know works for my children.
So this is like a perfect moment. Like I want to like really get to the point of just what RIE parenting is, like in our own words. So if we could do like a short summary of what RIE parenting is, I think that'd be great, just for our listeners, just to really understand like what it's all about. So like, I'm going to give you my definition, my summary of what it is. And you guys can correct me or let me know what your thoughts are. So I said it is a method of parenting where you give your child access to a safe place where they can develop autonomy, creativity, and pretend play skills. You also engage with your children in validating their own feelings.
Pretty good.
I like that.
I'll go next since I also don't have as much experience with it. But the thing that jumped out for me when the little bit I've read about it so far is the piece on that you're really observing the child and that they're their own like human. And you're there to, I mean, Hillary already kind of described this and so did Michael, but you're there to learn just as much from the child as the child's learning from you. That observation piece is so key to me. And I think every single behavior analyst needs to be trained on it as well. Hillary mentioned this earlier with a lot of the clients we serve, people don't see them as humans. And whether I've said this a few times if you're a parent, but even if you're not a parent and you don't ever plan on being one, but you're working in the disability field, you need to learn about RIE parenting and apply it all to your clients because they are human and they deserve respect, dignity, and agency just as much as anyone else. And honing in those observation skills is really what's going to be key in supporting those things. We're often taught to be observant of the environment, but we are not taught to be observant as the individual and like what their goals are and like what they're trying to accomplish. We're actually often taught to do like the opposite. And we pathologize everything. We look at deficits and we're constantly just trying to fix stuff that if we were truly taking the perspective of the client we're serving, we would have a whole entire different way of approaching things. So that was kind of a long answer because I turned it into why we need it as behavior analysts, but that's my summary.
Go ahead, Michael. Yeah.
Okay, because my AirPod just went out. Give me 1 second. I apologize. Let me try to do this one this way because I have an answer too. I don't know if you guys can hear me because I can't hear you. Let's see.
You can't hear us?
Hold on, I can't hear you guys. Hold on.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, so I just for reference, I just wanted to like clearly define what RIE actually means. So RIE, R-I-E, actually means Resources for Infant Educarers, and this is a word that was created rather than educators, right? Educarers, right? And it goes back to all the things we were talking about with respect to observing and being more of a caretaker rather than an educator, right? That there is a difference there. We touched upon that. The way that I look at RIE parenting, though, is a little bit different. Like when I look at RIE, I literally don't even think of Resources for Infant Educarers. Like that's not where I go. Where I go is I do it a little differently. So here are my RIE. So my RIEs are respect and response, right? That's how I look at it. So how you respect your child and how you respond in communication to what they're doing is something that needs to be an integral part of how you look at RIE. And then the I part would be independence and involvement. So it's curating independence and it's regulating your involvement, right? And so there are times where you have to be very involved. There are other times where you really shouldn't be involved at all. So that's the I piece for me. And then the E piece for me is empathy and environment. And the empathy really is about the respect, right? Going back to looking at them as a human, as a whole human, and actually empathizing with the infant. So for example, one of the things that RIE talks about is, like whenever I pick up my daughter, I don't just grab her, I say, hey, I'm going to pick you up now. There's an empathetic piece there, right? Why is that? First of all, because communication is important. And secondly, because I wouldn't do it to any of you guys. I mean, can you imagine if I walked up to any of you and literally just picked you up out of nowhere, right? Your response would be probably pretty bad, and rightfully so. And rightfully so. And so why is it that I would then do that to an infant? Why? Simply because I can? Well, then I'm not being very empathetic. I am not putting myself in that person's headspace. And so that is the difference. I have to look at them as me. What would I like? how would I like to be treated? And just because they can't communicate, if they're an infant and they were just born, just because they can't communicate doesn't mean that they're not experiencing the experience of whatever's happening to them. And so that's why the environment experience. So again, for me, it's respect, response, independent involvement, and empathy and environment. That's how I look at RIE.
I'm over here, I'm going to cry. That was so beautiful, Michael. That was so beautiful.
For the people like listening to the podcast, you have to go to our YouTube page and like watch the video and see Hillary like cheering Michael's answer on. It's like the best thing ever.
I tell people this all the time. If you would not do this to me, why would you do it to a client?
Yeah.
Right. So I had people look at me like I was absolutely bananas when I would talk to my child and say, is it okay if I change your diaper? Okay, I'm going to change your diaper, right? That is crazy to people. But again, why would I do that to somebody else? Gosh, I don't know how to follow that up. Amazing. Just amazing. That was so good, Michael. I want to like frame that and put it in my office. So good.
Zoom high five.
I want to talk about, you guys all did such good summaries and like definitions. I want to talk about what RIE applied is for me, because I think that is what it really, because I cannot follow up Michael's answer. That was just too good. So I would be remiss if I did not talk about my ABA passion, and Megan probably knows what's coming, but I think RIE applied is the PFA and SBT process. Like, I really think those two things go hand in hand so well, because in the PFA, practical functional assessment, and skill-based treatment, and I'm going to talk about ABA first, I'll talk about parenting second. What I do is I teach people to do RIE in reinforcement because it's setting up an environment with all the things that your child could require, or your client requires, so they have no need to do anything to get their needs met, being available to them. So if something is missing, you're observing that and helping them get their needs met, and providing a safe space for them to have whatever feelings that they're feeling and empathize with them and provide it, be available to them for that. And I just think this aligns so well with that process. What doesn't align, and I know that in the RIE field, ABA is a very hot topic. What doesn't align,
not in a good way.
not in a good way, and not in a good way. I know this, but what doesn't align is how we actually go through teaching skill-based treatment in ABA. So I'm going to leave that out of this. But even if you're not going to do PFA and SBT, if you can take what Michael just said and put it into your practice, everything will change for you as a practitioner, because not only will you be providing that for your students, so much will come back to you too. Like, when you create a space where human beings, whether they're a 2-year-old with no language skills, or a 15-year-old with no language skills, or an 18-year-old with a lot of language skills, if you create that space, that starts to become a two-way street between you and other people. And I think Michael talked about this earlier, like at the bar. I think these are great leadership skills too, right? So if you can create and cultivate these spaces for your clients, even if you're not going to do anything else, if you can do this, things will change for you and for your client, because you will allow them to teach you what they need. And I don't think a lot of people do that. I don't think they give their clients in this field a lot of space to tell them what they need, and said they tell them what they need. The practitioner tells the kid what they need, and nobody listens.
Usually in line with anything they actually need.
Not usually in line, right? So a lot of times when I run this really popular Facebook group, a lot of times people are like, well, this is happening, and what is the child trying to what do you think is missing? And it's like, well, take a step back and really watch the child and see what is really missing. Is it really that they don't want you near them? Or is that the way that you are near them is not what they want? And so I think RIE teaches you how to do this through really strong observation skills, not of the environment, but of the child. As a parent, what RIE means and what the definition is for me is just make sure that my connection is primary. Always reflect on how I've interacted with my children and what I've done, because we all make mistakes. And sometimes maybe I don't RIE all day. But RIE teaches me as a parent to take a step back and reflect on that and recognize maybe what I did today that I shouldn't do tomorrow, that was maybe disciplined, didn't put the respect and dignity of my child ahead of everything else, and didn't place more emphasis on connection than management of behavior. And that is the hardest skill as a parent for me when I'm a behavior analyst and I have mental health struggles of my own, when my own children have a rough day, to be able to do that. And I think I definitely will own that I have days like that. And RIE has helped me as a parent to be able to come back the next day and change my own behavior to do better for my children when I don't do well, right? Like just to know that I'm not doing well and the skills I need to reflect and come back and do it better the next time. And I think that has been such a valuable thing as a parent, because we really expletive up, like we really mess it up sometimes, and knowing how to come back from those mess ups is such an important skill.
I would imagine with the mess up piece too, it takes away some of the like guilt around it, because a lot of parents like make a mistake. I know there's times where, you know, I've yelled at Taylor because I have my own stuff going on and I just can't anymore. And I become a momster. And then for like days, I'm like, you know, really upset about it. So I can imagine that it helps with that piece too, especially if you're already struggling with like anxiety or depression and things like that. It would help, you know, sort of shift that for people.
Yep. Guilt and shame are a self-fulfilling cycle. And I think RIE helps us put some words to them, and they kind of suffocate when they're talked about. Because when we mess up, I'm like, oh, sorry, Michael, go ahead. I've been talking about
No. I just love, because I was going to get into the piece that you just talked about with regard to we're not perfect, right? Like, again, I was bringing it back to what I was talking about before with the environment, and some people listening to this thinking, oh, this is such highfalutin, like, oh, you guys are all like, you know, in this space. Like, we have to reiterate what you did beautifully, Hillary, that look, we're going to mess up all the time, right? We're like I just talked about like telling my child that I'm going to pick her up. That doesn't mean that I've done that every single time. I'm not perfect. As I was saying this, I was reflecting upon myself going, I guarantee you that there's somebody at a restaurant at some point listening to this that saw me and goes, oh yeah, you forcefully sat your daughter down one day. I saw you, you know what I mean? Like, don't be a hypocrite, you know? 100%, it has happened, right? But to your point, Hillary, yeah, and I love what you said. What it does is that when you reflect upon that, you're now reflecting upon that. Whereas if I didn't have those tools, I may not have reflected on that, and that just might be the thing I do and just kind of let it go. I don't let it go, and I also don't shame myself for it. I look back and I say, okay, how could I have done? How could I do this better? And I do it better the next day because I have the tools. So I just wanted to, I just love that we're being honest about like we're just these are tools, and we're gonna drop the tool belt sometimes. You know what I mean? Yep. We're gonna drop our pants sometimes, kind of thing. You know, and we're gonna be exposed. We're gonna be exposed. But all you can do is you can pull your pants back up, you zip it up, you kind of go, you know, and you have the tools to continue moving on. And I love that. Yeah.
I want to add real quick. Oh, sorry. For the piece with like forcing the child to sit or whatever. You mentioned that, you know, with RIE, you would reflect on that and see how you could do it better next time. People who aren't following a parenting method like this, not only wouldn't have that reflection, but would continue to do that. And that's going to escalate, because at some point the child will be stronger. Then it becomes more of a battle. Then you get more of a negative relationship, and that connection piece just goes further and further away. So I think it's important to point that out as well, that for people that don't have these tools or haven't looked into this type of parenting method or something similar, it's a disservice, this idea that like, well, I'm the adult, and so I know what's best, and I can physically overpower you, which Hillary and I both know, being 5 feet tall, that like that lasts very, very
not long
time. But I think there's just such a thing in our culture that, you know, the adult can just overpower someone and make it happen. And so that's what a lot of people do. It's the lowest response effort cognitively. Physically, it's not, but cognitively, you have to think through less steps, and you can just kind of do it and move on. And there's a lot of people, we all talked about feeling shame and guilt when those types of things happen, but there's a lot of parents who don't. And then that's where we start to see a lot of issues come up between parents and their relationships with their children. And then also for the children later in life, because again, they're missing out on learning so many skills. So hopefully if you're listening to this and you're the one that like forces people through stuff, whether it's in behavior analytics sessions or with your own kids, I hope you're starting to think about what the impacts of that could be.
I have 3 things. One, The other thing I love is that when I do mess up, I do go, like, RIE gives me the opportunity and the knowledge to know how to go back and repair with my child and sit down with them and let them know that I messed up, like, and I am sorry that I messed up, and really bare my soul to my children. I think that is a really hard thing to do, especially, right? Like, we're supposed to know better and we're supposed to be the adult, but really, like, when I mess up, I sit down and I say, like, I messed up and I'm really
Such
sorry.
a good model though. They need to see that so they know they can mess up.
It's such a good model. The second thing I want to say is that it is never too late. Like, I oftentimes talk to families who are like, well, this won't work. We've been, we've been down this road, and it is never too late to start doing stuff like this. I talked about this earlier, like, teenager brains are like toddler brains. It's never too late to start doing this with the people around you and your clients and your children and your spouses. It's never too late. And then the third thing I want to say is that there is still a time and a place where we need to help children physically from hurting themselves. And I don't want to lose, I think that is involved in RIE. So when we think about RIE, when we are helping children manage conflicts with other children, we allow that conflict to go on, but we do not allow anyone to get hurt. Right. So the putting your hands on people aspect that I know you fight against, Megan, I fight against, I feel really strongly about this, but there is a time and a place where a child or a human needs someone to take control because they have lost control, and they require an adult to help them manage that because they don't actually want to feel that out of control. They actually do want an adult to help them. But if we're doing this from this place of safety and care and rapport, those situations should be very minimal, and they should truly only be because of safety, right? You're not going to just be like, I'm going to put my hands on you as your kid is running into the street. You're going to stop the kid, right? Mm-hmm. And afterwards, you're going to talk to them about why you had to put your hands on them and how maybe next time we can set up the environment better so that you don't have to do that again. And so I think that, yes, we're not going to force kids to sit and do table work that they don't want to do, but we're also not going to let kids run into the street. So I think that's a really important thing, that the component of putting hands on children is still there, but the lens in which we think about doing that is very small and only when absolutely necessary.
And then if you have that connection and that trust, and your whole, like, 99.9% of your relationship is around not putting hands on and building up, all of the things you both have been talking about, the moments when you have to put your hands on are going to be less aversive, and they're going to come from a place of a strong, whether it's teaching relationship, if you're doing ABA sessions, or parenting relationship. So the like response from the child in that moment is probably going to be much better than, again, if you're a parent or a behavior analyst who's just constantly putting your hands on and, like, never building up that relationship part.
Yeah, the child can't discriminate when you're trying to teach them something versus when you're trying, right? And I think that's the component. Like, I'm only going to put my hands on you when I have to for your safety or someone else's safety, and never any other time. Just had my daughter interrupt. But I think that's such an important thing, and something in our practice we need to do. And I just love applied behavior analysis. It's like I live, eat, breathe, and sleep it. So I'm going to always bring it back to that our field needs to learn to do better is when and how to put hands on, because it's only when we absolutely need to. And you're right, when you do that, the child really, at least in my experiences, I don't know, there's no research to back this up, but maybe there is. But in my experience, the child is like, oh, whoa, like, wow, this is like a real situation right now, because mom or Hillary, Mr. Hillary, Miss Hillary, whatever they call me, doesn't ever do this. Like, this is what's happening. Why are you touching me? And you didn't tell me first. I got to take, and then it gives you that pause. And in that pause, you can say, wow, I really need to help keep you safe right now. And they're like, whoa. And it's like, okay, now we have the space to have the conversation. Not always, but over time, now we have the space to have that conversation. Whereas in typical escalations that I observe in my job and with other parents, that space is not there because there's no understanding from the child why a parent is touching them or why a caregiver is touching them. And this helped, I think, in RIE, like, we only touch and do things with permission or when it's a safety concern.
Yeah. And often for the parents that are touching all the time, they don't even try to explain it. They just, like, pick the kid up and, like, move them around and, like, do stuff to them. And there's no explanation of, like, why that happened, or, like, the recap that you were talking about, Hillary, like, I'm trying to keep you safe right now. It's just like, move you and you will do this because I said so. Sorry, Michael, you were going to say something.
No. I just wanted to give the parallel because, again, we're talking about the physical act of touching in this particular case. And I want to give the communication parallel because I think that that's always the important part. And that's what RIE gives you the tools to do, right? So from a communication standpoint, what is the putting hands on example from a communication standpoint? To me, that's raising your voice or screaming, right? So what another tool that RIE Parenting helps with is when you're speaking to your child, the way that you speak, the way that you communicate from the time that they're born is consistent, right? So you're consistently speaking at a certain tone, and hopefully that tone is this tone, right? You're just speaking. You're speaking in the way that you would normally speak to anybody if you're having a conversation. And in the same way that you guys were talking about putting hands and how that needs to be a stark difference, you know, so that they're, whoa, why did dad do that? Why did mom do that? In the same way, your communication should work the same way so that you're only raising your voice and you're only getting boisterous and getting loud in the same way that you would use putting hands, right? Like, so
I'm not going to let you do this.
Correct.
That's the words. I'm not going to let you hit Hillary. I'm not going to let you run into the street. I teach every person I work with, say it like that. Say it like that every single time. When you go put your hands on, the words are, I'm not going to let you blank at the moment that you put your hands on the child with this tone of voice. That's RIE in practice right there.
That's it. Right. That's right.
And I get people go, well, how are you gonna follow through on that? You're not gonna let them. You don't have a choice in letting them. It's like it's just informing the person that what is occurring right now is no longer within the expectations of this relationship, right? So I'm not going to let you, meaning that you're stepping outside of the boundaries of the relationship that we have right now. Can I actually not let you? Probably not. But I have to, as Dr. Greg Hanley says, I have to have enough money in the bank to make a big withdrawal on that relationship in that moment and say, I'm not going to let you. And the child's going to say, oh, then I don't want to necessarily. Or maybe I'll test it a couple times, but you're going to be super consistent, which also actually puts more money in my bank because really consistent boundaries that are reasonable create better relationships with children. So I'm not going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you do that. Inconsistency over things that really, really matter actually create and cultivate that connection more, which seems very backwards, but it is very true. Children crave boundaries. They crave adults to manage the environment for them. And if you can prove to a child that you can do that for them, then they will also do it for you.
Love it.
Love it.
Joe, have you thought, you've been awfully quiet because we're just like, have you
and I love it.
Sites or
so one thing I'm thinking, and I hear this and I'm like thinking, well, I live in Virginia Beach, and like one of the things that we love to do is go to the ocean. So let's take RIE, like typically when I'm at the beach, and I see this all the time, and I would do this too. It's like, if I have a kid and I don't want them in the water yet, I would yell like, hey, come back here. I don't want you in the water. But with RIE, how would you show that respect? How would you use this parenting style to make sure that your child is safe? Like when you're at the beach and the ocean, and it's not necessarily and the ocean is a very dangerous place if you're not watching your child. You know, something could happen within 5 seconds and that's it. So
who wants to go first?
Yeah.
Well, Michael, you live at the beach too. So
I do. I live on an island.
All right. Well, there we go.
Different kind of beach. It's not a nice beach.
What island are you on?
I'm on Whidbey Island. It's a big island off the coast of Washington State.
Yeah. I've been to what is it? Bainbridge?
Bainbridge?
Yeah. I've been there. I haven't been to Whidbey. Anyway, so we both live at beaches. So what do you do?
I mean, look, for me, first of all, I don't necessarily know that the way that you just described it, Joe, is necessarily bad or goes against, the whole RIE parenting philosophy. I mean, look, as Hillary talked about before, if your child is running into the ocean, you might have to get loud at that point, right? You might have to, that's a tipping point, and that's okay. You're going to have tipping points throughout this. But what you would do before you get to the beach is you would have a lot of conversation with that child about what the beach is, right? You would have a lot of open-ended, like, hey, what do you feel? Like, how do you feel about the beach? You know, especially if if it's the first time they're going to the beach, or, you know, once they're accustomed to the beach, you can have a lot more conversation. But it seems like in your example, Joe, you know, what's happening there is, you know, they've gotten to a point or a stage in their life where that now they're kind of getting into the water without you being there. Like so once this starts to happen, you kind of have to observe them still. As far as I'm concerned, you still kind of watch them. It's a little bit of helicopter parenting. I hate that term, but it's a little bit of that at the beach in this particular case, because you kind of have to be close enough so that they don't drown, but you have to be far away enough. You have to be far away enough to not need, you know, for it to still be coming from them, their education, their ability to get into that water and sort of feel a certain thing. And then if they need you, you're there. And then, you know, if something happens, you kind of, you know, hey, come over here. Let's talk about, hey, do you know what's going to happen if you walk over there? Do you know that there's a deep end of this pool or of this ocean or whatever? So it's always just a constant communication with your child as to what they're doing. Now, if they make a beeline towards the beach and there's a shark in the water, whatever the case may be, you know, worst case scenario, you're gonna yell and you're gonna run and you're gonna grab them. And then when you kind of shake off the fear for a second, you get to their level, you look into their eyes, and then you speak as calmly as you can. Hey, did you know you were about to be shark bait? Did you know that?
Do you know what shark bait is?
Do you know what that is? Let's have a conversation. Here's a shark. That's that. Right? So anyway, that's What do you think, Hillary?
I love that.
So for me, I feel like my experience in ABA really helps me with parenting, because I have pretty incredible instructional control with my kids. But I have a lot of friends who have very boisterous boys as well, who will just run, right? They'll run into the ocean. So my kids have done this too, but we've done, I mean, I feel I have a lot of angles to come at this question. One, if we're practicing RIE enough, it doesn't have to be like, it's not an all or nothing type of thing. But if you have that kind of relationship with your child, I feel like these situations just generally tend to go a little bit better, because you've already set the expectation. They already know how mom and dad are going to react. You already know the boundaries. They already know how you're going to follow through. It's not super unpredictable to them. But, you know, same with Michael. Before going to the beach, and I talked to people about the first time I took my son to the dentist, we watched dentist videos, we talked about the dentist, we role played it. And then our first dentist visit as a 1-year-old was actually really good, and they were really surprised. But it's because we taught him the same way I'd teach anybody else, right? So that's what we do. We talk about it. We'd maybe think about things that we need to do. If he's not old enough to maybe communicate with me, then we need to come up with a plan as adults of how to keep our child safe. So if we know that when we go to the beach, my son typically likes to run straight to the water, then we know that dad has the baby and all the stuff, and mom is ready to run. Right? Like, that's just the plan. And then, like Michael said, and we live on an island. The water's too cold. The kids don't go in the water, but we go to North Carolina beach every couple of years for family vacation. And it's very stressful. Like, it is not an unstressful event for me as a parent, because the water's warm, the kids want to play in it. So it is exactly what Michael said, is that one parent is available to be with the children who want to be at the water at all times. They are never near the water without an adult. And if impulsively we are unable to maintain staying at the umbrella right away, and it's maybe not worth the battle because parsimony, then we will run to the water first, right? And the initial excitement will wear off. They'll come back and get their sunscreen on after that. And I do what Michael does, which is we're at the water's edge and I'm just making some observations. Wow, the waves are pretty strong, and I'm there. Like, I'm probably a lot closer than Michael is, because drowning is my worst fear as a parent. So I'm right there. If they get too deep, I'm grabbing them, but I'm going to let them have that experience of feeling the power of the water, because just like me, I've got to experience the hard stuff to understand it. So I'm going to let them have that experience in a safe way. And if I can't let them have that experience in a safe way, then we might not go to the beach. You know, like we might have to try in some other ways first. We might have to do this in some more controlled ways. If I truly can't keep my child safe at the beach, I might have to take them to a pool, right? Like, to give them those practice opportunities in a more controlled environment, to know that we have what we need to go to an uncontrolled environment, right? Or maybe it's the first time we go and we don't expect that this is going to be a thing. And like Michael said, we just manage it the best that we can in the moment. And then we reflect upon it and come back at it another time, another day, in another way. So, I mean, I think, I agree. You're going to chase your kid down. You're going to keep them safe at all costs. But I think if you can take a step back and evaluate what you need to do to provide that as a learning opportunity the next time, valuable learning opportunity. Like it is really valuable for your child to feel independent and autonomous enough to explore the water. Because what I see at work and with other parents is they don't get the opportunity and they're going to take it anyway. And it's going to be way more unsafe the other way. They are going to, instead of just dip their toes in the water, they're going to dive into the water before someone can grab them. And then they're really going to be in trouble, right? Whereas if we can provide them that safe opportunity to learn, it's going to be safer. They're going to learn something, and we're going to build a relationship where they're not going to want to be oppositional to me because I'm not controlling their every move around something that I see as unsafe.
Yeah, one of the things that I see that are the hardest things for parents to understand, or at least the things that I see that other parents sort of don't do, that RIE Parenting has allowed me to do, is simply that idea of let things happen. Just let things happen. You know, do not try to control every aspect of your child's life, or as a matter of fact, try to control as little as humanly possible.
Yeah.
Literally have that be the conscious mindset. I'm going to control as little as humanly possible, rather than, you know, because parents have it in their heads, and I have family members and all kinds of people that I know that, you know, they're great parents. They're great parents. They're loving parents. They are, for all intents and purposes, amazing parents. Parents is not a word. Amazing parents. But they do struggle with that piece. They think that their job is to prevent chaos, right? I know as an adult what's going to happen if you go into that water. So therefore, I'm going to not let you go into that water in whatever capacity that is. Rather than what Hillary said is, let them go into the water, let them experience the wave, let them experience the thing, and then be there for the, you know, to reflect upon what has happened and to be that safe space, if you will, as we keep talking about. You know, you have to be the safe space. The safe space is you as a parent. The safe space is your communication. The safe space is how you interact after the fact. The safe space is not necessarily preventing that from happening. You have to let things happen. Very, very important. It's one of the things that I had to struggle with, because you see your kid going up on that slide and they're about to fall off that slide, and you're impact, you know, what you want to do is, and you see parents all the time, you know, holding the kid's hand up everywhere they go. They're holding them, they're sort of dragging them like a dog on a leash, you know, and it's like, you gotta step away, you know, they're gonna fall. It's gonna happen. They're gonna drink some water. They might even breathe in some water sometimes. It's okay. You gotta let them go through that experience. It's very important.
It's scary. It's probably the hardest tool as a parent to learn, is to let go and let kids make mistakes. But just like any teenager that any of us were, your parents could tell you all day long what would happen if you got in that car, right? They could try to prevent it as much as they wanted. You're still getting in that car. So you might as well get in the car knowing you can call mom at 2 a.m. for a pickup, rather than what could happen if you don't have someone to call when shit hits the fan. Sorry, I swore.
That's great. I said that earlier too. I feel like I was the only teenager that didn't act like that. My dad was military Jack, and like, you didn't F with that. Like that. Nope. You did exactly what military Jack said to do.
I was a really good kid too. So I even something like, you know, in college, someone telling you like, if you don't get that paper done on time, but sometimes you just have to experience those failures, right, to learn from them.
Yeah. I have two questions for you both that came up for me while we were chatting that I didn't put on the planning sheet. So feel free to say I'm not answering this, but the first one is super selfishly. So Hillary, I'm curious, and I'm directing this at you, but Michael, you can answer too. So Taylor is almost 5. And I've learned that there's this lovely developmental phase that 5-year-olds apparently go through where they're like bossy and all the things, like they have to be in control of everything, and they want to push every single boundary like ever possible. So sometimes I'll think I'm being nice. Like the other day, he asked for some ice cream before bed. And this is, I mean, like with snack time, right? So like he had a little bit of ice cream left in his thing or whatever. And I was like, okay, you can have this ice cream as part of your snack. Like that's normal. But there was only a little bit left. And I said, you can have this ice cream. That's it. Then it turned into like a 30-minute tantrum because he also wanted my ice cream. And I was like, no. And then we're at my parents' right now. I brought some toys with us. He loves garbage trucks. So he knows like there's this container that I bring when we travel that has his trash. And then I put trash cans in it for him, and I bring some garbage trucks. usually bring like 10 to 20 trash cans, whatever can fit in the container. And he knows that. That's what we've done for months. So that's what I brought. And then he threw this like huge fit yesterday because I didn't bring enough trash cans. But there's just this constant, like, it's not enough. Like whatever he gets, he wants more. And then just in general, like wanting to like boss all of us around and be like super highly independent. And he's an only child, so it's a little bit easier for him to maybe like sneak away with that sometimes than like if we had other children or whatever. But I'm curious, like if you dealt with that at all with your son and like what insights you might have. And of course, Michael, you can chime in as well. I just know that your daughter is not at that age yet.
Yeah.
It's what you can look forward to.
I was gonna say, yeah, lots to look forward to. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I have deep feelings about this because it's still happening, and I don't know. I mean, this might not necessarily be the RIE answer, but
right. I'm just curious in general what your perspective is.
The RIE answer is that if you're going to hold a boundary and you're going to keep that boundary, do it and just be there for your child while they have their feelings. And there's some really cool videos online of people like modeling this, like their child is laying there. They don't want you near them. They don't want you to leave them. They're really upset. They want to scream at you, but they don't want you to talk back. Right. And how you can do RIE through that. And you're just available to them and you're maybe not speaking and eventually maybe 30, maybe 45 minutes later, your child comes over and is ready for that chat about what happened. Right. So if you're going to hold the boundary, that's what I do. If I'm not going to relent because I can't, like, it's not going to happen. Or I'm just kind of feeling mean sometimes as a mom, which happens, and I'm just not going to do one more thing for you today. I'm sorry, I'm done with this. And I'm going to hold that boundary and I'm going to be very clear about that. It's a lot like, I'm going to say it again, it's a lot like unavailables in the PFA, right? Like this is unavailable and it's not happening. You can have the feelings you want to have about it. And I will be here and empathize with you. I'm not going to mess with you while you're having these feelings, and I'm here and available when you're ready. On the flip side of that, as a parent, sometimes we relent, right? Like sometimes we can't handle it and we need to stay sane and we can't always hold a hard boundary. And I also think that that's just not really what life is like. Life isn't always just a hard boundary. So for me, it's the age old, I pick my battles, right? Like if I can, and it's reliable enough, I'm going to variably reinforce before the tantrum gets too big or before it becomes too much of an issue. And I program that into our lives, I think, enough that we have been able to work through a lot of the really big feeling, like the huge tantrums. They don't happen as frequently as they used to. That could also be aging. So that's kind of how I manage it, is I do the RIE, I'm here and available. This is not going to happen. I know that's really upsetting for you. And I do the, you know what, why not?
Yeah.
I can do that. That's cool.
Yeah. I kind of find myself like fluctuating between the two. So like my inclination is to be like, stop crying.
Nope.
Right? Like, just, dude, you have your freaking ice cream. Focus on what you have, eat it, and go to bed, right? Like, why are you throwing a fit right now? But then, like, you know, I pull back in and I'm like, hey, it's normal. Like, I might cry if I didn't have enough ice cream too. Like, that's totally fine. And I try to comfort him through that. I pick battles all the time, but I always like talk about it. I'm not just like, oh, you whined a little bit, so sure, you can have whatever. I'll say like, oh, I didn't realize you wanted that so badly. And, you know, I didn't really have a good reason to say no. So sure, why not? Let's do it. But if there's a hard line boundary, I try to be as clear as possible, even as I'm giving it. So like when we got here with our trucks and stuff, I was like, mommy brought what mommy brought. That's all we have, you know, but, and I think part of it too, is like, there's just this inclination, I think, especially as a parent, it's hard for me to watch him be upset, right? So like, I want it to be over with, you know, I don't want him to have to feel that way or to like go through that. And that's just my own issue that I have to like deal with, right? And like, just being like, let it go, let it happen, and he'll come back around eventually. I
have that issue too. And I also want to add that when even still my older child has a hard time, it triggers my anxiety pretty badly. So that is something I have to be extra conscious in how I manage. And I don't always do that very well. So when I don't do it well, I typically go to coercion. And I talked about this in our quote when we talked about coercion before. That's like my go-to. That's what I learned growing up. That's how I nannied. It's like an ingrained response to say, well, if you don't want that, you don't get anything then. And that is though, that is the worst. I feel so bad when that happens, and it happens, right? And I think I have to be gracious with myself too, and own up to it with my child, and do my own self-work around those things.
Yeah.
It is hard. It's really, really hard.
I have one last question around this, and then Michael, sorry, you can talk too. I'm just curious, because especially with like how great of a parenting relationship you have with your children, I've just noticed this for Taylor and a few other children that I'm working with that are around the same age. Does your son do the like, I hate you stuff yet? Like, does that happen at all?
No.
So like,
fingers crossed.
Yeah. So that's been like the most surprising to me, because we do have a really strong relationship and he's only 5, but it's like, what he means is in this moment,
I'm really mad.
Really upset. Right. So like, I try to model, like you've been talking about, I hear that it sounds like you're upset right now. Some things, you could say about that. But it's like, that just really gets me, right? I'm like, how the fuck, or shouldn't have said that. How can you hate me? Like, why would you hate me right now? I just gave you ice cream. Like, what the heck? I don't understand. But yeah, so
ice cream.
That's one that's really throwing me for a loop. But what's interesting is the families I work with that have children with, like Taylor's skill sets around like regulating his response to things are pretty strong, because we've worked on it for quite a bit of time. And then I have clients where those skills aren't present yet, even though we've been working on it. And it's been really interesting to see how like Taylor and the clients will have that initial reaction that's the same, but then he can bring it back around within like 5 or 10 minutes and usually doesn't spiral out of control. But for one of our clients, that could turn into like an all day long situation. Yeah. So that's been really, and the words used, depending, like if the client has a really big verbal repertoire, that's when you start to hear things like, I'm going to kill you, and like all of that kind of stuff. And it's like, it's the same sentiment, like Taylor's saying the same type of thing. Like he's just so upset right now. And like, I'm the safest person to him that he's just going to say these things. And then I see that like same thing happen with clients. And I think for me as a parent, that's been the hardest. And I'm like, how, like, I got all my tools and like, none of it's working to like work through this. And I just kind of keep reminding myself that hopefully this is just part of like a developmental phase and it's going to go away eventually.
Well, I think it is. And I think the thing that I remind myself, because maybe we don't say I hate you, but the sentiment is there. And I think I see this with clients too. What that tells me though, about what that child is experiencing is that if they are able to do that and then maybe come back from it, there's probably a lot of trust in a relationship where they can regulate and figure out what's actually happening for them. And not to say anything about any parents, because I know everyone's doing the best they can, but oftentimes what I have observed is when a child is expressing those really kind of hot emotions, they maybe don't have a place where it's safe to have the emotion, right? So they might, for me, what I try to do is I work with parents to create a space. And a RIE, it's really RIE. I mean, like I use RIE with ABA. This is how I teach parents to be with their kids. I don't really do like parent training. I teach parents to empathize, validate, create safe spaces, and focus on connection. And so that's when I do that. It's like your child is having those big, hot feelings. Here are some tools that you can use in those moments, because it's not really the child's job at that point to manage that. It's the adults around them to manage that. And so like when it's happening with my son, it's similar. It hurt, it's hard, but it really is a step back and say, this is not about me. This is about what's happening for him. And I need to be here. I need to figure out in what way I need to be here for him better in this moment to help him manage this and regulate and it's really co-regulation with an adult. And I think, I'm not saying you do this, and I'm not saying this about your clients, but I think as a society, we miss that. We're saying like self-regulation, babies need to put themselves to sleep. Kids shouldn't cry over spilt milk. Those are all normal. What we need to do as adults is figure out the ways that we are supposed to cultivate connection in those times, and everything else will sort itself out, because children will learn in that environment. They will learn how to do those things. We don't need to teach anything about that. We just need to be that safe space for them. And it just always comes back to that. Like, I don't teach regulation skills ever in any of my programming. I teach adults how to provide a space where regulation can happen. And then the child tells us what they need for regulation. Maybe they go get the stuffed bear, or maybe they ask for a hug, or maybe they want to go slam the door, right? They tell us what they need, and then we start helping them choose those things over time. But if we don't create that space at first, we have no idea what they need to regulate. Deep breaths and hand squeezes don't do anything for them, right?
Thanks, Hillary. That was great.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, like, as a teacher, we write treatment goals for like self-regulation and work on identifying strategies. And to be honest, like a lot of times they don't end up working.
They don't work.
No.
They don't work. Zones of regulation is one I used to teach, and I look back and it's something I do better with now, right? Like like we don't need to know that zones of regulation. What we need to know is what to do with what's happening in our bodies. And like I tell people this all the time. For me, I know what I do when I'm super overwhelmed. I take a bath and drink a glass of wine and read a book. But I'm sure that is different for all of you. And I figured that out on because I had the space to do that. I had a spouse who would say, do what you need to do. I have the kids, or I had the opportunity for someone to allow me to find those things. And I feel like we strip that away from kids all the time at work. And I see parents doing this too. You're okay. It's fine. It's not a big deal. Let it go. It's not a big deal. You're okay. You're okay. Oh, that's not a big deal. I'm not saying you do this, Megan, but I already gave you ice cream. No more ice cream. Like instead saying, wow, you really want more ice cream. That sucks. I'm sorry.
Yeah. We definitely talked about that, but
yeah. And then that's it. And then you're just in that space, and it's such an uncomfortable space, but it's really a skill to learn to be in that space when someone is upset and not try to fix it.
Yeah. And I think when we see that, like that it's okay and people trying to push through on things, it's because the adults, I've been talking about this in some of the trainings lately. I don't remember if you were on them or not, but like they're so on their own agenda. They're so focused on all the stuff they need to get through and what needs to happen for them in the day that they just try to like push the kid through it instead of slowing down and pausing and taking the time to have that space and just recognize, be flexible that like, no, you're not going to get through your whole checklist today. And that's okay.
And again, this is why I love the PFA, because you don't do anything unless you're teaching from joy. And I think that is a beautiful thing that we need to do in this field, is to never do anything to children that they don't want to do if they are not happy, relaxed, and engaged, because they're not capable of learning anything until they are.
Yeah, none of us really are.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
Michael, do you have anything to add? Sorry, we were talking and I didn't give you an opportunity.
No, I love hearing all of this. It validates a lot of the things that I do. I mean, you guys, look, at the end of the day, I'm a dad. You know what I mean? You guys are literally working in this field and doing this every day. So to hear you guys and how you're talking about your clients and how you're talking about parenting and all these things from somebody who literally just had, again, I was thrust into this in many different ways. It feels really great to hear you guys discussing this, and it makes me feel like, wow, I'm learning a lot, but it also validates a lot of the things that I've already been doing. So it gives me a lot of confidence, and it makes me feel good about, sort of my approach and how I've been doing this. And so I know I have a lot more to learn, and it's always going to be the case. I hope I never stop learning. So I just really enjoy the engagement here. It's great. I appreciate it.
Awesome. I had one last question before we share resources, and I'll try not to talk as much this time. So this is, again, a selfish question. We've talked about how different people will approach parenting in different ways. I definitely came from when I was a child, like my parents definitely did not follow RIE. I don't think many of our parents did. So in terms of like the other people who engage with your children, whether it's a spouse or another parent or like your parents or daycare, whatever it is, what have you found to be successful in helping to get them to adopt like some of these techniques as opposed to just being like authoritarian and coercive, if anything?
Go ahead, Hillary.
I'm
thinking.
Or you can think about parents you've trained too, Hillary, if you've had like situations where they're really,
this is hard. It's a lot harder at work, or it's a lot easier at work because people are asking for my help, right? Like when it comes to family, they're not asking for your help. It's so much harder. I let a lot go. That's really this plain and simple for me, is that like RIE research tells us that if the children have the place somewhere it's okay if it's not everywhere. So I let a lot of it go. And I just like, if any of my family are listening, they're going to laugh because they don't really, they do it anyway, because I am just really strong in my opinions always. And so they all know how I feel about things. And I'm going to tell my parents to listen to this, they're going to laugh, but so I don't necessarily, it can be hard. They know how, but it like, there are things I just let go. And if it's a real issue for me, I just say it. I just say, hey, he's allowed to be upset, and I would prefer if you just let him have his space. Like I will absolutely intervene on behalf of my child if I really feel like it's a necessary thing. But it is also important for my children to learn to interact with the world in different ways, knowing that they still have the safe space at home. With my spouse, like this is hard because I'm a behavior analyst and he's not. I'm sure that anyone in this position can understand that when you feel like you know a lot about human behavior and behaviorism and parenting, and you maybe have a spouse who doesn't do that level of research, it does put a weird power dynamic in your relationship, and it can be really hard to navigate sometimes. So for us, it's just always an ongoing conversation. Like before we had children, I told my husband, like, here are the 5 things that we have to do or we shouldn't have children together. And those 5 things have been stuck to, right? So that hasn't been an issue, but they were big deals. Like we're not spanking, we're not gonna, I'm gonna breastfeed. Like these are the things that are gonna happen with our child. And they have been big things that haven't been a problem whatsoever. It's the small stuff, right? That like how we decide to do bedtime routines and how we decide to like provide opportunities for meals, and like those little conversations are what pile up and can be harder to manage. So it really is just like having the opportunity to have the conversations and learning, just like at work, but it's different, learning how to communicate with my partner so that he will listen. And that's a hard skill for me, and all of my family who hear this are going to laugh, because I'm just the kind of person who just gets what they want because they're really determined about it, and that does not work in my marriage. It does not work that way in my marriage. So it's just a new skill set to have to learn when you're parenting and trying to do that with somebody else who comes from a different knowledge set too. And I also want to say, because I'm sure I will make my husband listen to this, his knowledge is just as valuable. And I think I sometimes lose sight of that. And I really that like he deeply loves and cares about our children, and his views and beliefs and knowledge about what they need is just as important as mine. And if we can come together from that place, we can come out of it with an agreement of how to manage different situations.
This is so full of like the best advice for everyone who's going to be listening to this. Thank you, Hillary, for those insights. Michael, do you have anything to add?
No, that was great. that literally, that is exactly right. I have nothing to add to that whatsoever. Yes.
Joe?
I love this. Like, this is great information just for me to be like being a future, like potentially like foster parent. Even just foster parents in general, if they're getting into this, like I love the whole idea of RIE, because this is what they teach us in trainings as well. And like these kids are coming from a place where they need that respect and independence and having empathy, like learning empathy and having the safe environment. Like that's all like what our training is teaching us, and what our social workers really want us to provide as foster parents too.
Yeah, RIE is really a trauma-informed approach. I think that when you think about foster care, there couldn't be a better fit, because it really is based in connection, which is the treatment for trauma.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. So I do have one quick question. Okay. I love interacting with kids, and if they are on the floor playing, I love interacting with them. But this is going to be hard, because unless you can tell me different, but because you're supposed to let them play independently. And
such a good question. Like this is okay, Michael, I've been talking so much. You go on this one.
Okay, yeah. So perfect, right? So this is one of the harder concepts to understand. It's also one of the most misunderstood, I think, in my opinion.
I agree.
So yes. Okay. First of all, I think Hillary and I both touched upon there are aspects of RIE that maybe I think we align that we don't agree with. Part of that is when they're very at a very infant stage. The idea of laying on their back when they first wake up and just kind of playing on their own. that's fine. But to stick to that in a rigid sense is where it becomes wrong, right? So, for example, to your question, Joe, I love my child. Okay, I'm a stay-at-home dad. Okay, like there's nothing more that I like in my day. Nothing makes me smile more than being able to interact and play with my child. Right? Nothing about RIE in any way, shape, or form has stopped that from happening. On the contrary, what it has done is it has informed me how to play with my child in a much more constructive way. So, what do I mean by that?
Okay.
So, here's how it works. From a very infant stage, when they don't have the communication skills to come back, yes, what you do is you let them play with their toys, and you sort of, again, I'll use the helicopter parenting kind of concept, because it does kind of work that way. So you're observing, you're sort of watching them play, how they're interacting. What you're not doing is you're not saying, oh my gosh, you picked up that block? What a great thing you did. Oh my God, that's so amazing. You know, because then what you're doing is you're conditioning your child that their happiness comes from your response, right? So that they're dependent upon your being there and your response and all of your interaction. So the principle here is you don't want that to be the case. You want them to have their own imagination. You want them to have their own flourishing with their own playing and their own brain. Does that mean that you shouldn't, Joe, go in there and enjoy the playtime? Absolutely not. You absolutely should, as a matter of fact, but you're doing it with the context of what are you experiencing, right? How you're seeing it, you're doing your best to see it through their eyes, rather than to be the sort of puppet master, the circus ringleader type thing. It's a shift of focus, right? Are there times where you're going to be that? Look, I'm a theater guy, right? Like I enjoy, like I'm going to do the puppet show, okay? Like I'm going to put on the costume, I'm going to do the thing. It's not that you don't do that. It's that you have to be conscious of leaving room for a lot of times where there isn't that. It's a healthy combination of the two.
Yeah.
But knowing that them being alone is sometimes even more important than you being there to be the ringleader. But in no way does it negate the fun and the times where when you are, it makes life that much better. Like, of course you do that. That's how I and it's worked out great, because now, you know, my daughter, if I'm tired, for example, and it goes back to what Hillary was talking about with the it kind of allows us to be a little lazy sometimes. So if I'm tired, you know, because I've practiced RIE parenting with my daughter, I'll tell her, you know, hey, you know, Dad's tired. You know, can you just kind of go play with your toys real quick, you know, and let me kind of just relax for a couple hours? She'll do that. And you know what I don't have to do? I don't necessarily have to give her the iPad or give her the phone or I don't necessarily have to do that. Does that mean that I have not done that? Of course I have. I've given my daughter the iPad. I've given my daughter the phone. Okay? I don't want to pretend here. But what I'm saying is that for the most part, I don't have to give her the phone. I don't have to give it. It's the requirement that she knows she can go on by herself, and she's not going to be upset about that. She's not going to feel left out, left alone. She's actually going to flourish with a couple toys by herself, and I can take a nap if I needed to, and not worry about, you know, having affected her, you know, lifelong development. I know she's okay, and she knows she's okay, which that's the most important part. So that's how it works.
RIE has allowed for me to send my children off to play, and they will literally play alone for 3 to 5 hours at a time without my involvement, which is, I don't know very many families who can say that. Like, they're 3 and 5. My 3-year-old will play for 4 hours by herself and sometimes she really wants to do that, because we've given that space that Michael's talking about for them to learn to play without anyone telling them and without looking for anyone's approval. It's beautiful. I love it. I don't know what I do with that time. I don't sleep or rest.
You're working, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm working. I'm sitting on my phone. Yeah.
You're on the Facebook group for PFA.
That's exactly what I'm doing. And I think that, again, I'm going to talk about the PFA again, because, you know, and what Michael was talking about is you observe and you're available, and you're not pushing your agenda. Instead, you're allowing the child to push their agenda. And so it's a lot like the PFA. It's child-led play at its essence. It's you are available to them. They have the agenda. You have no agenda. You're available to do what they want to do, and you're helping them live their dream, whatever that view is of what they expect is going to happen. You're just an accessory to the play, and you have no say about what's going to occur. So whether you're there or not, they're still going to do that play, but you being there probably adds to it and cultivates that connection that we're talking about, because it actually informs the safety of when I have an idea, mom supports it and is available to me and helps me execute my plan and doesn't force her own ideas into my plan, which is like, you want to talk about teaching someone autonomy and creativity. I mean, this is like teaching someone how to be a leader of the next Apple, right? Like, oh, I can go tinker in my garage with computers for 7 hours and no one's going to tell me what to do. And if I create garbage, it doesn't matter because I learned something. It's such a beautiful thing. It's such a beautiful thing. I am very lazy. I don't love playing. Like I'm not like a get on the floor kind of play person. So I love the aspect of RIE where I can sit back and have someone tell me how to play. Because I don't want to have to force my agenda because I don't usually have an agenda.
Yeah, but to Joe's question and underlying point. See, for me, I'm different, Hillary. I love to play. Like I am literally a theater guy at heart, right? So like to Joe's point, right, with his question, like I did have a little bit of a disconnect when I was first learning about RIE and thinking to myself, boy, what I don't want is I don't want to lose that interaction with my child in any way. Like I don't want that. As a matter of fact, I want the most interaction. I'm a stay-at-home dad. What else are we gonna do? What am I gonna just like, you know what I mean? Like this is my job essentially is to provide the entertainment, is to provide the, you know, all of that is how I felt. And then through learning about RIE, I realized that actually me being there, me allowing her to have that space, and then observing when I do become the circus ringleader or whatever the case may be, when I do the puppet show, I do it so much better because I'm much more informed as to what is it, the things that she actually needs. I'm not forcing something. I'm not trying to create this thing. I know what she needs because I know how she's already playing. So I'm using those tools and her feedback sort of, you know, and my observations to be a much better ringleader, to be a much better puppeteer, right?
Yes.
Because I'm focused on what she's needing, and I'm not just creating this because I think I need to. I know what she needs, and I'm just doing it better. You know what I mean? So.
And when I think about, again, I can't stop myself. When I think about the PFA, this is what it tells us to do, right? Follow the child's lead, fulfill their needs as they expect them. And sometimes this can be really, really hard because a child is telling you, like, maybe they can't tell you, maybe they can't communicate with you what they need. So you really have to be a good observer to realize the child wants you to hold the iPad in a very particular way and do something with it in a very particular way. And if you don't do that, it's going to be a problem. And you have to learn that kid so that they don't have to ask you to do that anymore. You just do it for them. And that creates a lot of safety and trust, especially for someone who can't communicate their needs very well, to say, oh my gosh, they understand. They entered my world. They see what I see. They understand what I'm expecting to happen in my environment. That is so empowering for somebody. When we think about people with disabilities who maybe don't have a lot of language skills, it's so empowering for someone. I see this happen all the time at work. For the first time, for a person to be like, oh my, this is actually going to happen for me. You're actually going to let me do this thing and you're going to join me in it. It is such a powerful moment for a child to experience. And it makes me sad that more kids don't get access to that because it's such a beautiful place where creativity blooms. I mean, creativity comes from that place where they don't have to fight for their needs. Their needs are just provided to them in play and in other ways too. But play is where we learn.
Hillary, to go along with that, not only when you do that, are you creating that space and that connection and that opportunity? And they're like, oh, she sees me, she gets me. But you're also not having the situation where it's the opposite, where the two people might be just in opposition of one another and constantly battling. And it's like, not only does she not get me, but she wants me to do all the things I don't want to do. And like my needs are not met. And I just need this person out of my life, like pushing away, get away from me, stop trying to like do stuff in opposition to what I want. And of course, like any of us as humans, you don't want to be around the people that are like creating that kind of interaction with you. You try to get away from them. And you may go to enormous levels to make that happen.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, this has gone by like so fast. We're already on like the 2 hours, but so the last question we just had for you all to make sure we can get it in the show notes. Are there any resources that you found really helpful in learning about RIE that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, I did want to talk about this before because it's a really simple answer for me. YouTube. I mean, literally, like, I did not sit down, full disclosure, I did not sit down and start reading a bunch. Like, I literally went on YouTube and watched, Hillary was talking about the modeling and watching this in action, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'll caution you, as anybody would know, that when you go to YouTube, you're also going to find a lot of stuff that's not necessarily going to be the greatest. But if you have some good research skills and you can kind of filter through the nonsense, there's a lot of really good stuff on YouTube, specifically about RIE. A lot of good teachers and a lot of good modeling on there, especially about independent play. There's a lot of it showing how that works and showing the progression even of the child as they've grown and how that's affected and how they're sort of interacting. There's a lot of good stuff. So really my simple short answer is YouTube. It works really well for these types of things.
I don't have time to watch anything, and I like have a YouTube versions for some reason. I don't know why. Probably because I have young kids, and if I ever bring up a screen, they just want to watch with me, and it's just really annoying. So Facebook is my thing. I love Facebook and blogs, and so I actually found this through Facebook, through Janet Lansbury's Facebook page. She also has an awesome podcast called Unruffled, which I highly recommend. Magda Gerber is like the grandmother of RIE, and all of her stuff is amazing. She's got books, and everyone who's like saying anything about RIE is basing everything they're talking about in Magda Gerber's understanding of human behavior. Teacher Tom is a local preschool teacher to me, and he is amazing. He has the best blog, so definitely check his out. And then Maggie Dent, I also love Maggie Dent. She specifically focuses on boys, which has been, Megan, you're gonna want to get her book. She has specifically a book about raising young boys. She just came out with a new book about raising teenage boys and what boys need to become like good members of society that we have failed to provide them. So I love her stuff. I cannot recommend it enough. They all have Facebook pages and they post frequently with lots of great knowledge. There's also a private Facebook group called RIE Parenting. That's pretty good. Just like any parenting group, though, it comes with its pitfalls of judgment and really hardcore believers. So I don't really post in there. I'm in there to read and learn from people. That's about it. So yeah, that's what I wrote down.
Yeah, with respect to some of the things that I have read, it's not that I didn't do any reading. So just to reference that too, because I said YouTube, that's good. But I did write some of the things that I did read. So Baby Knows Best, which is Deborah Carlisle Solomon, was a good one. It was just just little pieces of that were just, it spoke to me. The way she writes, I think, was it was just an easy read. And what was the other one that I wrote? That was the main one. Oh, well, you already talked about Janet Lansbury, Elevating Childcare, the Guide to Reciprocal Parenting. I mean, so there's excerpts in there too. So those would be the two that I really, read. But again, YouTube really, it was just one of those things that once I read it, once I understood the concept, to actually watch it in action and kind of see these people talking to me about it, really, it really hit home for me. So.
Yeah, there's also a lot of free workshops that these educators do online. So they recently Teacher Tom he just announced he's doing like a full day workshop on how to teach with loose parts and pieces, which is a part of RIE. It's just one philosophy of what kind of toys to provide your child. And he has a free workshop coming up. It's a pay what you think basically workshop. So that's on his Facebook page. He just announced it yesterday. I think it's sometime in February.
Awesome. Joe, you're getting all the resources. Like the timing of this could not be any better.
Now I'm like, I'm going to send it to my wife and be like, hey, we need to check this out. Like, go look at this. And I mean, I'm going to dive into this. I love it. I love how RIE and PFA mesh. That's just so awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, they only mesh on the SR side. They do not mesh at all when it comes to placing your EOs, because RIE does not ascribe to that at all. So that's my disclaimer. The RIE community does not like this at all, but RIE does inform the PFA, like the what you need to actually do the PFA, which is SR and HRE. RIE is the best tool you could have to try to figure that out for a child.
Yeah.
And just for people that might be listening, for the abbreviations that you just gave. So like on the reinforcement, happy, relaxed, and engaged side, and not on the like skills-based, kind of putting stressors in place piece. But that gives me an idea. I was going to say we should try to hop on again in like a few months or something and do like a Facebook Live chat And what would be interesting is, Hillary, to kind of dive in more on like the PFA, SBT stuff, and have Michael give input as the dad on like what are there different ways that like maybe we could think about doing some of the things that are being done with PFA SBT process that would be more in line with RIE, and maybe more acceptable from like a parent side of things.
I would love that. And I would be happy to give Michael private lessons on what PFA is prior to that, so he understands what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Oh, 100. Thank you. I would love all of that for sure.
Cool. Well, we really appreciate both of you being here and sharing. I know we kind of talked about some personal pieces, right, with your own parenting. So hopefully this is really helpful to our listeners. And again, whether you're a parent or not, if you're practicing as a behavior analyst or teacher, or anyone else that's interacting with children, hopefully you can take what we talked about today and start putting that into practice as well.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Joe.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it. And I think it's going to be a great resource for me as a future foster parent. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys. This has been an amazing discussion. And Joe, I'm so proud of you, and I'm so happy that you're getting into this adoption. I'm really curious actually to see, and to kind of stay in touch and to see how you've applied these things. And it's really heartening for me to know that you have these tools now, and that you're going to be adopting, and all the things that you guys are working with. The idea that I'm here right now as a dad, with you guys, all three of you, I was a little nervous coming into this conversation, to be honest with you guys, because I only have a certain reference. You guys have been studying all this, but it makes me so happy to have been part of this, and I appreciate that you guys are listening, and that I have any input to give whatsoever. Anytime you guys want to teach me anything, by all means, I'm all ears, because I'm always learning, and I'm always very interested in these topics. So thank you guys for having me.
I'm so grateful too. I have followed Megan's work for a long time, so I feel really honored to be invited to do this. I really appreciate it. I also feel like I will never live up to the acronym that Michael dropped for RIE ever. So Michael, you are fitting in just fine. You have some amazing thoughts and things to share, and I'm so glad you were here because I learned things from you too. So
yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Well, with that, we will close out. Joe, do you want to say our little closing line?
Yes, I love this closing line. All right, guys. Thank you for being here. Now go forth and do better.